California is no longer clear. In fact, toxic algal blooms have affected waterways throughout California, both freshwater and saltwater, and the problem is likely to get worse as the climate warms. Harmful algal overgrowth affects everyone, but it especially affects tribal communities who often depend on clear bodies of water for sustenance. And that makes this an environmental justice issue, not just a straight out environmental issue. Well, to address this problem and perhaps offer some collaborative solutions, we have two speakers. Gina Solomon is Professor of Occupational, Environmental, and Climate Medicine at UC San Francisco. In previous roles, she was Program Director at the Oakland Public Health Institute, and she served for 6 years as Deputy Secretary for Science and Health at Cal EPA, so has experience both in academics and also directly in policy. She's joined by Sarah Ryan, who's Environmental Director for the Big Valley EPA and is co-developer of the Clear Lake Cyanotoxin Monitoring Program. Both of these experts are sure to increase our understanding of why algae are blooming and maybe what we can do about it. So please welcome our two guests.
Thanks, everyone. So glad to be here. Let Sarah start with the introduction of the topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Ryan. I'm the Environmental Director for the Big Valley Band of Homo Indians. I'm really happy to be here to present on a collaborative project ceremony. And when we look at a lake that is plagued with cyanobacterial blooms that have danger levels of toxins, we knew that we needed to do something about it. The tribal environmental program, which I head, its primary focus is to ensure that the resources are thriving and healthy, so that the tribal well-being and health is assured.
Great. So I'll step in with a little bit of background on harmful algal blooms, because I'm guessing that many people in the audience haven't heard of this issue, may not really understand what a health and environmental threat, and in some cases catastrophe they can be, and also what causes them. Like, why do these things happen? So, okay. We've used the term harmful algal blooms and HAB, which is just the 3-letter acronym. And these basically are organisms in the water that grow and develop and proliferate, sometimes to a crazy extent, as you can see here in this photo of Clear Lake in the foreground. When there's too much nutrient in the water, so fertilizer runoff is a big one, or septic systems, erosion of soil can even do it after big storm events. And then sometimes changes in the food web. So if creatures that would normally consume algae are not thriving, or stagnation. So when the water level is low, for example, drought, flooding, and climate change. So the big things that are that contribute to these events. And specifically, when you think about climate change, it's kind of interesting because changes in rainfall patterns can result in harmful algal blooms, whether we're talking about increased rainfall or decreased rainfall. So in the case of increased rainfall can result in runoff, nutrient loading, or decreased rainfall can end up with low water levels and stagnation, and stagnant water tends to grow these things. And warmer temperatures is just a big driver. The warmer it gets, the more stuff likes to grow in that water, and so you get these overgrowths. So the focus of this talk is mostly on freshwater harmful algal blooms in Clear Lake, but we should talk a little bit about marine ecosystems as well, because there are all kinds of different harmful algal blooms that occur, and they have nasty names: amnestic shellfish poisoning, paralytic shellfish poisoning, diuretic shellfish poisoning. These are all syndromes that can occur when people accidentally are exposed to, either by ingestion or in some cases by inhalation, if you're on or near the water and there's, for example, ocean spray, or from direct contact, swimming, for example, or surfing, get exposed to these organisms and the toxins that they produce, and can get a variety of different health symptoms. In some cases it's rashes, some cases respiratory, and in other cases it's neurologic. And amnestic shellfish poisoning is of particular interest. I have a little picture here of crabs. So this issue has shut down the California Dungeness crab fishery in the past. Actually not that many years ago, around 2018, because the concentrations of this domoic acid in the crab was dangerous for human consumption. So the other thing that you'll see on this slide that makes this issue confusing, and so you sort of end up getting into a lot of science, is the first bullet, amnestic shellfish poisoning, is like the medical syndrome that people get. People literally, if they survive overexposure, because in some cases this can actually be fatal, tend to end up with severe deficits of short-term memory. And so they can't remember what they did this morning, they can't remember somebody they just met. It kind of actually resembles Alzheimer's dementia in some ways, but even more dramatic. People basically can't encode memories anymore. It's a really significant issue, and not something we want to play around with. And also have to look at what are the safe levels, something like that. A lot to debate about that. And what are the safe levels in kids, for example? Still not really known. But then below that, I have domoic acid. So that is the toxin. That's the stuff that actually is damaging people's brains. And then below that, I have this unpronounceable pseudonychia. Pseudonychia, you see on the bottom of the slide on the right, that's the organism, that's what it looks like. And it's actually a diatom, it's not actually an algae. And so this just gives you a little sense of it. This issue is kind of complicated. There's the medical syndromes, there's the toxins, and then there's the creature, the little tiny creature, whatever it is, that actually is the creature that's producing that toxin. Now, I've talked about humans and crabs, and you can imagine the economic impact to California was enormous from shutting down the Dungeness crab fishery, but the impact to wildlife is also enormous. I just want to, mention the marine mammals and the birds that are dying every time these blooms happen. But just to switch now to the main topic, which is freshwater halves. In this case, most, but not all, of the toxins are produced by something called cyanobacteria. You and I may kind of know this as blue-green algae. You might have heard about that. So it's not algae, actually, it's bacteria, but still lumped under harmful algal blooms. And you see here at the top a picture of, this is Lake Erie. It's a satellite photo from the US Geological Survey. And you can see this like intense green, almost fluorescent, under certain types of light. These blooms can really just take over major parts of major freshwater bodies, well, small and large ones. So this is Lake Erie, so it's definitely well known in the Great Lakes states. And then below that, I'm sort of presenting this slide differently, but a lot of the different toxins that can be produced by cyanobacteria, and then the kinds of things that happen. A lot of these we're talking about, and in this talk we're going to be focusing on microcystin, super toxic to the liver, also a probable carcinogen. And so this is a different set of issues than that like amnestic shellfish poisoning we were just talking about. So this gives you a sense of, we're talking about a lot of different kinds of things here, but to give you a snapshot of the issue, we're going to focus on one case study for this talk. We're going to focus on the cyanobacterial blooms in Clear Lake, the microcystin, this liver toxin and carcinogen that's produced, and how it actually gets to people. And I already talked a little bit about marine mammals and birds, but I do want to also mention dogs, because one of the first things that we tend to see when there are harmful algal blooms is a big spike in visits to veterinarians, and unfortunately dog deaths, which are pretty common because it's often dogs that are swimming, as you can see here, in the water. And they end up ingesting it from the tennis ball, or from, they get it on their skin, their eyes. In humans who have contact with the water, so again, a lot of respiratory symptoms in the short term, headache, sore throat, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and skin rashes. That's the stuff that it can do to you, like acutely, but we're also worried about the long-term effects on people's livers, the risk of long-term cancer. And so let's switch and talk about Clear Lake, and here I'm going to offer the podium to Sarah Ryan, who knows this area better than anybody.
So HABs in Clear Lake, approximately 2009, there was a lake-wide bloom, and the Clear Lake itself is the largest natural freshwater lake in California. It has about 100 miles of shoreline. That's 43,000 acres, and is also a very shallow water body. There are 7 federally recognized tribes in the county, and there are countless other tribes that come to use the lake for ceremonial purposes, and to eat from it. There's a lot of tourism that happens, and so this lake is widely used. There's a lot of, that's actually 65% of the county residents get their drinking water from Clear Lake. There are other water bodies in California that are in the same situation, where they're getting their drinking water from that water body. Not a lot, but there are some water bodies in California that have that. But the ceremonial use, the fishing, the recreation, all these things that Clear Lake is known for. Starting in 2009, when we had this lake-wide bloom, we certainly noticed over at Big Valley Rancheria that, number one, people did not want to go in the water. It looked and smelled like raw sewage. It actually was a cyanobacteria called Limbia, that's the genus, and it was, nobody knew about toxins. It was just more how unsightly it was, how it smelled. And so there was a lot of economic impacts that happened that year, because there were fishing tournaments that were canceled. There were B&Bs and resorts and things that were, people canceled because they didn't want to stay. They were unsure about whether it was safe, and frankly, they just didn't want to be there anymore. So the tribes, the tribe I work for is one of the 2 shoreline tribes in the county. And so we were waiting for the county to come up with a plan to sample it. We wanted to know more about the cyanobacteria. We wanted to understand if there were any dangers. And frankly, you know, just what are the health impacts in terms of all the different uses that the tribes use it for, and others. And as Gina mentioned, and as you probably know, in terms of the traditional uses of the lake, it goes back, you know, thousands of years. There are aquatic plants that are used for basketry, for food, for ceremonies, and it continues to this day. Picture in the upper right is from our Tule Boat Festival. The tribe has an annual Tule Boat Festival, so that is a boat that my picture is, you know, a child with one of the boats in July. You can imagine July is when the blooms are. We've got hundreds of people coming to the tribal shoreline to race it, you know, build and race the traditional boat. So what do you do when, you know, year after year, you're faced with this thick matted water that smells like raw sewage? You know, you wanna be able to get some data from it. So again, we were waiting on some sort of program to happen, and meanwhile, the tribes that were on the shore prepared quality assurance plans with US EPA to be able to develop programs to test for, test the water, because it just wasn't happening. And so we began a cyanotoxin water testing program. What you see on the right is just an example, basically in 2021, and so this is kind of what we've developed with our program for recreational water. So we are getting samples from both the interior of the lake, but mainly on the shoreline, which is where these activities, the traditional activities, are occurring. And we're also able to just drive to these locations and take water samples. We also do microscopy, and we are sending off for various toxin analysis based on the genera of cyanobacteria that we see. Well, you can see with this slide on the right that this is some of the information that we produce, which is showing that there are multiple locations where it's at the danger levels of cyanotoxins, particularly nitrocystin, the liver toxin. And the recommendation from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, part of Cal EPA, is that you don't even boat in those areas. Not only not eat the shellfish from those areas, but also don't go in the water, don't let your pets go in the water. And knowing that there are people whose drinking water intakes are right in these areas, whether it's a public water system or their own private intakes, you know, we were seeing this for multiple years. Public Health Institute and Tracking California approached us and said, hey, you guys have a lot of data that you're collecting on the ambient recreational waters, and how about let's look at the drinking water aspect of it, because we know that there's hundreds of people, hundreds of households that are getting their drinking water from Clear Lake as well, and nobody was looking at the toxin levels or other just contaminants that were in their drinking water. So armed with this information of what the recreational water was doing, we embarked on our project. The tribe's program, as I mentioned, started in 2014, and you can kind of see from this timeline that we've been building on it ever since, which includes starting with just a few sites in the beginning in 2014, expanding it to additional sites that covered tribally important locations, tribally important times. I mean, we worked with the tribes of the area to say, what are the spots you'd like us to sample on a regular basis, and when would you like that to happen? We incorporated microscopy early on because different cyanobacteria produce different toxins. And I have to say that the way that we've developed our program is what we encouraged California's freshwater harmful algal bloom program to develop in the state's monitoring efforts. I do co-chair the California Cyanobacteria Harmful Algal Bloom Network and have for about 5 years now, or 4 years now. And our group of co-chairs, which includes someone from academia and someone from the state, our 3 seats, we are particularly looking at the water bodies of California, how few of them are being monitored for cyanotoxins, how few tribes are engaged in it, And also just a lot of the unknowns about blooms and whether they're toxic or not. When you start looking at the different uses of a water body, the water bodies in California, both the lakes and also the rivers, you need to understand that you're probably gonna be seeing cyanotoxins in there that could be explaining some of the illnesses, the disease, and also the animal deaths that are occurring. So our program has developed to not only further understand what we're seeing in a water sample, but we've also sent off multiple fish and shellfish for toxin levels and have found, and provided that data to the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. And there are other folks that are doing that as well. We think it's important to look at the different routes of exposure of cyanotoxins to the users of a water body. We see this as truly a Clean Water Act implementation, and we use this information to help push policy. So all of the outgrowth has included working with other researchers, really looking at the drivers of cyanobacteria blooms, and then the mitigation measures that could be used to limit the not only the bloom formation, but the toxin exposures that are occurring. We've expanded to testing benthic cyanobacteria in the creeks, also something that's supported by the Cow Watch project and funding, and that is where you see a lot of the dog deaths in the Russian River and other parts of the state because of the anatoxins that are present in the Russian waters. So, and really, talk about tribal beneficial uses a little bit. This is a graphic that we developed for the Water Board's Freshwater Harmful Algal Bloom program, and to help them understand the impact pathway of cyanotoxins. That's what you see in the center there, a freshwater harmful algal bloom event. But you can also throw any contamination that a community might be exposed to. And the point of it is to show that, whenever there are activities occurring, tribal traditional activities occurring, there could be a prolonged exposure because of the need to, be doing ceremonies in this area. I like to say, nobody would expect to go do Thanksgiving in January in a country. You kind of come together with your family to do it in November. And that is how it is with tribal ceremonies. It's time specific and place specific. It's not okay to go to some other water body at another time to conduct those ceremonies because of time and place specific. So that is why exposures happen, because they can't just avoid it. They're going to continue to do these practices and these activities that are part of the culture, part of the spirituality, and part of the health and wellness of a tribal community. And those exposures could be dermal, inhalation, ingestion, and those are, and consumption of the aquatic organisms of a water body. And it could be all of those things. It could be that people have to go a certain pathway and there's a lot of blackberries or something that are scratching their skin, and then they're going into the shoreline of that area to do ceremony, so they have a broken skin, and they've gone, and now they're going into a water body that has cyanobacteria that has dermatoxins. That looks really different from somebody bringing their family to go swimming for a couple of hours with a beach ball and sitting on a beach and drinking a Coke. It's a very different scenario. And we developed this impact pathway to explain that to the state agency who is responsible for really developing the monitoring strategy for the state. And I'm happy to report that this graphic, and also Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians experience in our program development, which, as I said, began prior to 2014, was helped build what the state program is, which is they do now encourage microscopy of water samples to determine the toxin analysis. They do qPCR, which is looking at the gene copy counts that can produce the toxins. And, they're looking at mitigation measures and drivers and nutrient drivers and things like that. So it's important for tribal programs to be, or for programs, water programs to be led by tribes, because you can get a lot from it, because really these are the users of that water. So the way that we look at this cyanotoxin monitoring program is that it's implementing the Clean Water Act to protect tribal beneficial uses. And so what we began was, or what we found, kind of skipping to our drinking water testing that we did, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a few slides. But we not only share the data with the local government and state and federal agencies, but we expect the agencies to respond appropriately. And if they don't, then we put the word out that they're not, and so, there has to be a certain response. Because the public is now aware that there are high toxin levels and there's no information coming out from, the water body managers. So we use, an educated public and have educated the public on these issues so that they are expecting information, they're expecting action from their local government. And when it used to be signs that were taken up and put down throughout the year, and making recommendations about, well, the water's clear, it's okay to go in, we were finding that, there were toxins, because cyanobacteria is like a water balloon, you lice it and the toxins are everywhere, and so you might not see the balloon, but there are toxins that are dissolved in the water and will be for a little while. Or with benthic cyanobacteria, it grows on the bottom, you don't even see it in the water column, there are toxins within the water column that you don't see because the water is not green, it's benthic cyanobacteria growing. So a message that was put out for a long time by local government was, water's clear, it's okay to go in. And our research and data and just the continued information about it was like, you've got to change the messaging, this is not correct and it's not protective. And so they listened to that. There were a lot of great public health officers over the last several years in Lake County who are listening, who do their own research and are partnering with us. And so when we found, one of the things that we hit upon was that every spring, they're gonna send out a press release that has Big Valley's logo, as well as other entities' logos on there, to say, it's important to recreate safely in the lake, and here's places where you can get information, and here's some resources, and here's where, here's what you wanna watch out for. So that's been a proactive measure on their part. They also, and they get supported by the water boards, the state water boards in doing that. I believe that Lake County is the most proactive county in the state because of the tribal program that has been, relentlessly putting information out there about the toxin levels, and so been successful in that. And these press releases are helpful. Here's a signage that it took 5 years of our program to get signage to be put out that looks like this, but there's a QR code that actually takes you to our website and to the current data, lab data from the cyanotoxin monitoring. And it also talks about recreating responsibly. And I remember the first iteration of this signage was, oh, enjoy a beautiful clear lake. It's like, no, this is not like a tourism sign. This is actually a sign, public health sign. So let's language it accordingly. And that's what they did. And so we have these, there are these signs that are in multiple locations around Clear Lake where people can use the QR code or call in to get the most current information about the toxin levels. And so I'm gonna hand this back over to Gina for the Cow Watch project.
Super, thank you, Sarah. And so just briefly, the Cow Watch project was a 5-year grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that enabled a partnership to happen between the tribe, the Public Health Institute, and a number of state agencies who were involved in supporting this effort. And the pieces of it included tracking illnesses, super important, informing residents and visitors, so you saw some of that, and also trying to get at this issue of like who's drinking this water, and are people who are drinking the water potentially at risk? And so that is what I'm going to be talking about right now. So right here you see on the top a picture of somebody's self-supplied water system. So this is a home where they actually are drawing water through a lake water intake. They have, often in a basement or garage or some sort of a basic treatment system that they have usually had installed by a professional. There are a number of companies around the lake that do this, and they treat it themselves and then consume it. At the bottom, you see one of the local water treatment plants that actually is a public water system. It is regulated by the state. It is held to certain standards, which the private self-supplied systems are not. But there's almost 500 homes around Clear Lake, that actually have their own little water systems. A lot of them are Airbnbs, interestingly, so beware where you stay. The public water systems are, there's 17 of them, and they supply 44,000 people around the lake. So the main goals: find homes not supplied by public water systems. We were also watching the data from the public water systems because they are monitoring. And so we were gonna be able to compare, enroll residents and give them free testing so that they would know what was in their water. We didn't just look for cyanobacteria, we were also looking at other issues like E. coli and herbicides, weed killers, because some of those are sprayed on the lake by various agencies, and those are of concern if they're getting into people's water systems. And so the first step was a really complicated parcel map to try to figure out which parcels actually had structures on them and are not within the boundary of any of the water systems around Clear Lake. So you can see here that it was a pretty complicated effort. And then we identified the parcels and then went out and literally Sarah and her team delivered postcards and reached out to people individually. And then it was challenging actually to get people to agree to say yes to this. And I think it was for several reasons. One is some of these homes were not actually occupied by the owner. So they were occupied either by a renter or they were Airbnbs or other vacation rentals, as I mentioned before. And so there might have been a lack of interest from the owner to give us permission to test. And then in other cases, some people in that area kind of, are a little suspicious when somebody comes along and offers a free service. So there was that challenge to overcome as well. And I just also want to emphasize these were mostly not tribal members. These were just, other people living around Clear Lake. And so the tribe was going out and providing a major service to the community in doing this and thinking about the entire ecosystem and the health of the people within it. So the bottom line here was that we tested from nearshore wells and from lake water intakes, and didn't find any cyanotoxins, any harmful algal bloom related products in the well water. So that was good, even though a lot of these were shallow wells super close to the lake. But we did find them in a lot of the homes with lake water intakes. This has a lot of the detailed data, which I'm actually going to skip in the interest of time. But just to talk a little bit here about the geography. There were certain areas of the lake that were much more affected, as you can see, down towards the more southern easterly ends of the lake. These are areas where there was more water stagnation, and so that may be part of it. There are probably other reasons that Sarah could talk about more, but this shows the locations of the participants and the locations of the recreational monitoring sites that Sarah just talked about. So you can kind of see that there was some overlap there of where the problems were found. And I actually just want to note that a lot of the times, like a lot of those nasty goopy pictures that you saw, the green goo, are often right near the shore. And so people, like, they have their lake water intake pretty far out. So they're like, oh, well, we don't have a problem, right? It's out in deeper water. Well, a lot of them had a problem. So, one of the other things we looked at was how effectively are people actually disinfecting their water, chlorinating, and a lot of the folks with wells actually, there weren't that many, but they had pretty, more decent chlorine residual. The lake water folks did not, so that's a concern for all kinds of gastrointestinal illness. And then this slide's a bit complicated, but I think the thing that's critical here is a lot of the companies that are setting up these systems are setting them up with bacterial E. coli in mind. And it turns out that we set up for that, and it doesn't work well. Actually, it sort of backfires for these harmful algal blooms, because what they were doing, these companies were doing, is they were adding bleach to the water, so sodium hypochlorite, first, and then they were putting the water through a filter. Well, what happens when you do that with these harmful algal blooms is the bleach bursts the cells of the algae. All those toxins spill out and dissolve in the water. And then you put it through the filter, the dead cell goop gets filtered out. Okay, that's fine. But all the toxins flow right through. And so that system design is super problematic, and yet it's most common. And what we found, and these sort of orangish homes at the bottom, are ones that had that design either without any additional filter, with any additional treatment, or with something outside the home. But the ones where there were actually additional treatment after the filter in the home, like a reverse osmosis treatment, for example, or ozone, would actually did better. And this just shows that, in contrast, a public water system has like so many safeguards. Now, they're still not foolproof, and you can still end up with public water systems that are impacted. But what we found is during the same time period where we were doing the private water systems, public water systems were okay, which is good news. That said, there have been horrendous examples in other parts of the country, Toledo, Ohio being a big one, where public water systems have delivered very hazardous amounts of algal toxins to people in their service areas. So we're always very alert to making sure that these systems are running well. We're working with folks from both the State Water Board, the Division of Drinking Water, that's really attuned to that. So yeah, this shows the press release that went out jointly from Big Valley and the county public health to advise people who have self-supplied water systems to not drink that water or use it. Free bottled water and water filling stations were provided during that time period, and now we're trying to think about what to do, because these kinds of situations are not that uncommon, especially if you look beyond California, across the country, and treatment systems are inadequate, need strategies for testing, alerting people, providing emergency water supplies, and then maybe connecting these homes to public water systems, or certainly identifying when conditions are hazardous for those. I do want to also mention that there's a lot of new technologies being deployed in this area. So as you've gathered, there's a lot still of like questions. You have to test the water to know for sure, like, is there, are there toxins in the water even if you don't see goop? The other issue being, you can see goop, but it's not toxic, it just is goop, right? Because not all of these produce toxins. So the testing is critical. Bringing the cost down for the testing, making the testing faster is critical because it costs a lot of money for Big Valley to run this program, and it costs quite a bit of money to do the CalWatch project, so we have to figure out how to do it faster and better. Satellite monitoring, big role for that. You can actually figure out where the blooms are and predict where they're going, especially for offshore blooms or in big lakes like the Great Lakes. But that satellite monitoring has been very useful in Florida, for example, and along the Gulf Coast. And then there are these cool new sensor systems that are being developed that collect data periodically from water if they're just like sitting out there. And then citizen science or community science has been great in this area. A lot of, there are apps that you can use to report presence of blooms, and there are people out there that are collecting data and reporting in the information. So if you're interested in this, you can check out CalWatch page or the BigValleyRancheria.com, bvrancheria.com. Clear Lake cyanotoxins page is amazing. There's a lot of information there. And you also can go to mywaterquality.ca.gov and find out a lot about harmful algal blooms there. So just want to thank the whole CalWatch team and the CDC for supporting the project, and open it up for questions. Thank you.